Welcome to Scrubbed In, the DVM Journey, the podcast where we dive into the wild, rewarding, and sometimes unpredictable world of becoming a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. I'm your host, Grace Gaynor, a current third-year veterinary student at the Virginia, Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine. Whether you're an aspiring vet, a vet student, or just passionate about animals, this is your backstage pass into becoming a DVM. From classroom to clinic, we're sharing the insights, tips, and real-life experiences to help you thrive on your journey to becoming a vet. So scrub in, and let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of Scrubbed In. I'm your host, Grace Gaynor, and today I'm welcoming Dr. Dan Phillips to the podcast. Dr. Phillips graduated from North Carolina State College of Veterinary Medicine in 2011. Dr. Phillips completed a rotating internship in small animal medicine and surgery at Tufts Cummings College of Veterinary Medicine. Following completion of his internship, Dr. Phillips moved to the Chicago area and worked in both general practice and emergency setting for 4 years prior to joining the Animal Care Clinic family of hospitals as medical director of Barrington Square Animal Hospital in the fall of 2016. After years of working with students, Dr. Phillips was inspired to create a program to deliver the mentorship needs of new clinicians across the country. So in 2019, he established Vet Mentor Solutions. Today, he serves as director of academic partnerships for Mission Pet Health and travels to veterinary schools around the country to educate current veterinary students. Hopefully I said your current role correctly.
Nailed it.
Amazing. Dr. Phillips, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Call me Dan, though.
Absolutely not. That would be disrespectful.
No, it's going to be good, Grace. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be a part of it.
Amazing. To start, can you walk us through your journey from vet school to becoming a medical director and building VMS?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the first part is that my journey, I think, is a little bit different than a lot of our colleagues that knew they wanted to be a vet since they were 5. I'm a little bit different. That veterinary medicine wasn't necessarily on my radar when I was kind of growing up and then in school eventually. And so I didn't really kind of make that leap until I was in undergrad, actually. And it was associated with taking a career aptitude test, actually, because I needed to find a major, right? Yeah. I was halfway through my second year, and in undergrad I needed to find a major, so I took literally a career aptitude test, which was 50 multiple choice questions or something, and then it assesses kind of your personality traits with different career fields out there, as well as some of your strengths and weaknesses, and it spit out a bunch of career options, park ranger and whatever else, essentially, and veterinarian was at one of the top. And I had animals my whole life, but I had just never thought of it as a career path, and I didn't really know too much about it. And so I was at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill at the time, which is kind of like the Virginia to the Virginia Tech, so to speak, right? Yeah. It's where people go to become human doctors and not go to the ag school and animal science or engineering, essentially. And so I called up the vet school, said, I'm interested in learning more, but I don't know where to start. And they gave me a reference for a fantastic alumni that was working in a true mixed animal practice, not too far from Carolina, where I was at undergrad. And I shouted her for a Saturday shift, and it was her and all of Alamance County, North Carolina, was in the lobby seemingly that morning. And to see her navigate all of that and how different every single case scenario was, but she was still doing math and science, the things that I loved and I was really good at, but I didn't know how to apply that to a career. I was like, this could be something. And that weekend turned into every weekend for the rest of that school year, turned into that summer, turned into multiple years there, turned into applying to vet school, and kind of the rest is history from there. And so I entered vet school thinking that I wanted to be a true mixed animal practitioner in rural North Carolina, primarily because of that mentor and what I had been exposed to. Yeah. And by the time I left, I was convinced that I wanted to be a boarded small animal surgeon. Because every vet student has to change their plan multiple times while they're in vet school, which is totally okay, I think. And so I ended up going into the match to try to pursue that process, and then did a rotating internship at Tufts. Learned a lot there for sure, and really I had a good experience, right? It was what I expected in terms of how hard it was, but it was harder on my outside life in terms of I even knew what the finances impact was going to be. I didn't realize the impacts that it might have on my wife's career opportunities, because it was difficult for her to find good employment when she knew we were only going to be somewhere for a year. And the prospect of continuing that for a lot longer was not the right thing at that time for us. And so started thinking for a different path. Life took us to Chicago. And so we've been there since 2012 now. Worked at a GP and ER combined for about 4 or 5 years at a very progressive practice, and elevated, I think, a lot of my medicine skills from there, but also learned some really tough lessons when it came to culture and leadership associated with that, and really kind of only learned what bad looked like associated with that. Went back into the job market and got super lucky to kind of pivot in terms of what my next goals were. I knew I wanted to continue to grow as a clinician, but really I was motivated by the opportunities that I saw with that previous practice, where despite their culture and their leadership, they were almost successful despite themselves, essentially. And I just thought there was a ton of opportunity to make things better for not just the clients and the patients, but all the team members as well. And I just didn't have a voice of influence at that time. Even if I did, I probably wasn't prepared to be a leader realistically as well. And so was really lucky to find 2 mentors at that point, and I started working at their practices, and they really poured into me for quite a long time in terms of not only developing my clinical skill set, but then even much more so leadership, communication, emotional intelligence, veterinary business acumen, those types of things. And then it transitioned, and the goal associated with that was to lead one of their practices. And so after kind of that tutelage for about a year, I took over one of their fledgling hospitals, and we had the opportunity to grow that primarily through training new grads, which was something that I found I really enjoyed. I didn't know how much I was going to like that until I got into it and realized that I wanted to do more of it. So we started hosting a lot more externs to kind of build that pipeline for the future, and also just kind of continue that teaching culture within our hospital and have it permeate. And I wanted to do more of that, but I didn't quite know how to do more either. And so that's when I started getting involved with universities, and I went on the VBMA tour, so to speak, at many of the schools around us in Chicago. So most of the Chicagoland students end up at the U of I, Purdue, or Wisconsin. And so I was spending a lot of time with VBMAs and SAVMAs primarily, encouraging those students to come to our practice and explore that in externships or summer jobs or whatever it was. We even built an apartment above our hospital to have students stay there, because you guys are broke. No offense, but free housing is a big seller. And so we use that as kind of a teaching tool, but also as a recruiting pipeline. And from there, part of training those early career and new graduate veterinarians, a lot of that was developing kind of a structured mentorship kind of schedule within our organization, and a lot of round sessions associated with that. And then, I realized over time that even though we were training a lot of people, the rounds weren't changing dramatically, right? So learning how to navigate the puppy talk was still the puppy talk, for my 2017 graduates as it was for my 2018 graduates. Mentorship was starting to build some momentum, and I said, I wonder if there is a way that we could make this repeatable for anyone else that was looking for this as potentially a resource. And so that's where the idea of making this on-demand video library came to be, and that's where VMS took off.
That is so crazy.
Yeah.
And how long did you develop VMS before you sold it?
Yeah, so the important part about that is I still had my full-time job at the time, right? Yeah. So you're an entrepreneur with this podcast as well. Yeah. You're still a full-time student as your main job. I still had a mortgage to pay for and the whole bit, right? I couldn't just say, okay, away we go, I'm going to build this company today. I mean, you could have, but you would have had to raise a lot more money to make that happen. Yep. And so my bosses during the daytime, my partners, my mentors in the daytime, in the practice that I was working for in them, I went to them and pitched the idea to them. They said, we love it. We want to invest in you to do that. And so I always tell people, they were my bosses during their day, and I was the bosses at night. Well, their bosses at night while I was building VMS. And so my daughter was 1.5 or 2 or whatever it was. And so, we would, rock her to sleep, and then I would sit in her room and spend a couple hours writing scripts for videos and thinking about ideas and putting contracts together and those types of things. And so it took about a year to build the entire video library and the platform on which to put it on. And all that time we were starting to leverage some of our connections with students that had come into our hospitals to try to raise awareness about it in schools across the country. And then so this was in like 2019-ish, and we transitioned into 2020. And my other goal at that time was to become an equity owner in that group of practices. And my bosses knew that was our goal. We had talked about that openly as well. And that was, I think, part of their trajectory and their plan as well in terms of what we all wanted to do together. Then COVID happened, and, things shifted a little bit in terms of what are the goals for that business of hospitals. And they were very open and honest and transparent, and they've always been with me. And they said, we're going to partner with another group of hospitals and sell to another group of hospitals, but we know what you have your goals in mind, and we don't want to just leave you in the lurch. And if you trust us on this, we'll see if we can make this all work out. And working with them for the previous 4 or 5 years had really fundamentally transformed things for me. And I said, let's give it a shot, right? And so they sold their hospitals to Mission Veterinary Partners in the fall of 2020. And it was a fledgling kind of growing company at that point. We were hospital number 100, and they were in the process of developing their own mentorship program for the organization for all of their new graduates. And I had the opportunity to pitch to the VMS platform to the CEO at that time and say, listen, I know you're in the process of trying to develop this. Could this be a springboard opportunity for you? Originally, I was thinking about it as, okay, like MVP would buy a bunch of subscriptions for their new grads was kind of where my brain went, but it turned into eventually just incorporating the entire MVP or VMS into MVP as kind of the backbone of the initial start of their mentorship platform. And so it all came together, and it was a great opportunity, and big chunks of that video library are still available for all of our employees today to reference and pull up on their phone at any time, pretty much.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
It's a literally incredible story. A couple things I want to mention that I want listeners to hear. First of all, I know that there are people listening right now that are thinking, there's no way I could ever do something like that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's simply untrue, because we can always find things that we could be doing better and gaps where something's missing, either some type of development.
An opportunity.
And I think that if we go through our careers and look for those, we could have that next type of entrepreneurial development. And I think that that's important for people to remember, that as long as we show up to our jobs every day, we look for those opportunities, we could create a side hustle like that.
Sure.
There's an opportunity for it, we just have to be looking.
Yeah.
And clearly for you, you have a passion for mentorship and helping new grads, and you turn that into something that ultimately not only helps new grads now, but also worked for your financial.
It did, yeah. And I didn't know, obviously when you start a venture, you have no idea if that's going to be the case or not, right? And so was it a risk? Was it a gamble? Sure. Did a lot of things come together to kind of make that quick development and then, quick kind of, opportunity associated with it? Yeah. So there was plenty of luck that was involved. But you also had to grasp the opportunity when it came about as well. And so it was a great time in my career. Worked really, really hard and put in a lot of hours during those weeks for sure. But to your point, it was an opportunity. It was something that was fueling me. And I had kind of that entrepreneurial or ownership kind of itch that was going, and at that time when it seemed like that equity opportunity within the practices themselves just wasn't going to manifest because of the future vision of where those hospitals were going, it was still a great chance to come up with something different and work with the people that had really helped me fundamentally along the way too.
Clearly you're very passionate about leadership and mentorship.
Yeah.
At what point did you realize you were interested in those things in your career?
Yeah, so I really got interested in leadership and mentorship when I met my 2 mentors after my first struggle job in Chicago. Yeah. So my 2 mentors are Dr. Dan Markwalder and Adam Conroy. I still work for them 10 years later. And I tell everybody that I meet that it fundamentally kind of changed the course of my life. And I'm so lucky for everything that they've poured in for me in terms of my growth, my development, opportunities, and doors that have been created because of my partnership with them. Have I worked my ass off for them over the years? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Has it been mutually beneficial for all 3 of us? 1,000%, because we have different strengths. We're in different stages of our careers as well. But I really got interested in it, truthfully, when I started working for them 10 years ago. And it was only a week, maybe a month into working for them and truly getting mentored by them, where I realized what good could look like in veterinary medicine. Because I had been in a progressive practice, and I knew what good looked like from a clinical perspective, but I didn't understand how influential your perception of your work life and experience was that is unrelated to the clinical experience, and it's associated with the culture and the leadership in any practice or organization or whatever it was. And I just didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know how to critically evaluate it. And honestly, I just kind of thought like going to work and every day and grinding it out in the suck was just kind of what it was, basically. And a lot of that was my fault for not exploring outside those set of four walls and being proactive about it. But once I realized kind of what that opportunity meant for myself and the impact that it had on not only my aspects of myself for my career, but my financial opportunities and the impact that it had for my family too. Like I was happier at my job, so I was happier at home. Like it's a big deal. And then when I saw a lot of the students that I was meeting at different schools really not fundamentally prepared with basic interview skills, with basic goal setting, professionalism, those types of things, I saw them falling into the same trap situation that I did when I graduated or when I finished my internship, which was, what's the prettiest building? This must be the best job. And that was the only perspective that I had, and I saw that same thing happening for new grads, for early career DVMs that were at their first job and it didn't work out and I'm burned out, or whatever the scenario and terminology is, and they're coming to interview with me and I'm asking them what matters to them and they can't tell me, right? And I'm like, we've got to do something different about this. And so that's where I started to try to be more proactive when it came to professional development for early career veterinarians, because developing your clinical skill set, is it important that you can unblock a cat and work your way through a blood gas? Sure, absolutely. That's super easy to teach. Not everyone is ready or capable or includes just practical, applicable professional development things in their curriculum transparently, and I felt like that was the same thing too for myself and my own experience. I love my school. I love my school, and I'm so thankful for the opportunities that my DVM has provided for me, and being an in-state student and the whole bit. I love my school. And I also know that it helped me become a competent clinician walking out the door, where I could build those skills. And whether I wasn't ready to accept it when it was presented to me, and I wasn't mentally prepared for it in terms of when professional stuff was brought up in the curriculum when I was there, and I just was thinking about, this doesn't matter, all I need to do is be the smartest clinician and it'll all be fine, or it wasn't presented well or in a way that was impactful for me. I don't know which one of those it was, but regardless, I didn't come equipped with a skill set to effectively navigate that, and it negatively impacted my career at the jump. And so that's kind of what's fueled me to try to do that differently for others.
Absolutely. I think that's really inspirational, and I think that mentorship is super important, especially in our field where people can become burnt out. It's a great way for us to give back to the community and help the next generation of vet students, which is kind of what the purpose of this podcast is. So I'm glad that you bring that up. Obviously, you funneled that passion into building VMS, and you also had the opportunity to practice mentorship as medical director. So I want to shift gears and talk about your experience as a medical director. How did that experience challenge and shape you as a leader?
Yeah, great question. So in many ways. So the challenges were many, mostly because I didn't quite realize the steps to being influential with change, right? So, whenever you come in and you're in a leadership role, there are opportunities, like you were mentioning, where you're like, oh my gosh, we could do this better, right? But if you just come in guns a-blazing, the chances that all those things are going to just magically happen for you and you're going to change it all in like the first week is probably not realistic, right? You have to build some trust first and put in that time to make that happen. You have to be an effective communicator. You have to learn who are the individuals that are going to be my influencers within my practice, right? They, either in a positive way or they can be barriers too. We had a phenomenal colleague in my practice who was the highest producer in our practice and a phenomenal clinician, like a truly phenomenal clinician, great friend, and absolutely passionate with a fire about veterinary medicine, right? If I wanted to do something within the practice, if she wasn't on board, the chances that that was going to go through were zero. So I had to learn over time, and with my mentor's help, because they coached me up for a year, they put me in charge of this practice, and then I continued to meet with them, outside of the practice on a regular basis to consult with them, to get feedback, to say, oh my God, I tried this and I totally screwed it up, right? Like, what do I do now? And they're like, we've been there, don't worry, you didn't screw it up that bad, right? The whole bit. The mentorship continued, it just evolved, right? But I learned that I had to get this associate on board if I wanted it to happen, right? And so I needed to have one-on-one conversations with her ahead of time and say, hey, I'm thinking about requiring canine influenza for any patient that comes into this building for a grooming or to stay for daycare. What do you think? Because that's going to take a lot of change management, because this has not been happening in this hospital for the last 10 years. Right? We just had our big outbreak in Chicagoland 4 years ago, and at my hospital, it was a nightmare. Yeah. It's the right thing to do, but it's a lot of change management for our team members and for our clients. If you're not with me on this, it's going to go to hell in a handbasket, right? And so those were just some of the things that I had to learn over time, and it challenged me, because I wanted to do everything, and I realized that wasn't reasonable either. And you got to pick some battles, you got to build that trust first, and rather than changing it all, you have to learn how to prioritize and say, if 6 to 12 months from now we had changed 2 things that really mattered and moved the needle, what are those things going to be? Because you can come up with a new opportunity of something that you want to change and make better every hour on the hour. And if you've got a list of 50 things, it's not going to happen, right? So where can you put your time and your energy that's going to make a difference and be focused and committed to it? So those were the big things that I learned: prioritization, change management, and finding the right people that were the influencers to get on board, and how do you manage those individuals beforehand if you're going to put forward some sort of change initiative of some type.
I love that. It sounds a lot like SMART goals, like very
curious.
Deliberate.
Weird how that worked out.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. Let's talk about your current role for Mission Pet Health.
Yeah.
You described the role recently as getting to travel around the United States and drink beer with veterinary students.
So it's a good job. Yeah.
It sounds good to me.
Yeah.
How did this role come to be?
So it evolved for sure, just like most things. I didn't, in the same way I didn't wake up when I was 5 and think that I wanted to be a vet. If you had told me 7 years ago that I wouldn't be in the clinic all day, every day, leading a team, and instead I would be, partnering with veterinary students or university administrators, I wouldn't have believed that either, and I wouldn't have known that was a job, I guess, is kind of the other aspect of it. So I think the big take home for me from the whole aspect of it is that there are a ton of opportunities for sure in veterinary medicine, and kind of developing some goals and having a network to be able to leverage so you can maximize those opportunities when they come forward is really, really important. But essentially, when my group of hospitals and my mentors sold their practices to Mission Veterinary Partners in the fall of 2020. Again, the organization was in its infancy, but in a definite growth phase at that point. And they not only needed to develop a mentorship program, but they needed to develop a way to partner effectively with students, letting students know who the organization was, what their differentiators were, and build a recruitment pipeline, honestly, for veterinarians, right? Like, it's a veterinary business. At the end of the day, you need veterinarians to run the business, right? Yeah. And so, again, at that time when I was meeting with the CEO and presenting to him VMS and kind of, this is the why behind it, this is why I did it, this is what fuels me, and could this be a valuable tool for this organization? Really, that's when the opportunity came forward to say, we need someone that understands our audience that we're recruiting, i.e. early career veterinarians and new grads, to kind of spearhead developing a program for us. And so that's where the job evolved from, essentially. And so I took that opportunity to build a team and learned a lot about recruiting. Right, I wasn't a recruiter. I was a veterinarian working in a practice and leading a team and coaching some early career DVMs. But I didn't know the mechanics of how to track people effectively and how to externships work and the ins and outs and all of that kind of stuff outside of my own experience as a vet student long ago. And so was able to kind of put a team together and develop some processes and some strategies. And as part of that, a lot of that is getting in the ground and doing the dirty work, right? Whether you're working in a clinic or you're staying up at night to write scripts for videos, or you're traveling to Blacksburg from Chicago to come and do a couple of VBMA talks a couple of nights in a row to meet students and let them know kind of what your differentiators are as an organization. It's all kind of the same. Essentially, at the end of the day, you have to figure it out. You have to understand what the audience wants, and you have to be a good communicator associated with it. And so it evolved from there. And so a lot of it at the very beginning was focused on veterinary students, for sure, because it was primarily a recruiting role. But now it's really evolved over the last year and a half to include effective partnerships with administrators as well, to say, hey, what are the things that maybe industry partners are strengths of that they could provide in a mutually beneficial way back to the university. Professional development, for example, right? Like there are a lot of team members out in industry who have been through this process and seen the strengths and some of the opportunities for growth for new graduate veterinarians, particularly in a professional development kind of area, right? I'm happy to come in and provide some of this context for you if that would be of value to you, right? And so that's where a lot of this evolves to now, and that's how we came to be in these professional development classes over the last 2 weeks. Basically, was a similar path to say, hey, what can we do as industry partners that could be beneficial for the university, and some of those experiences from outside the walls of the school are a little bit different than those experiences inside the school, and different perspective, different lens, and maybe different areas of expertise as well.
Yeah, a couple things I want to highlight. I love how you mentioned how many opportunities there are in vet med, and specifically how you never pictured yourself being in this role, but still here you are.
Sure.
Your career has evolved, and I think that is something that I really want listeners to hear. If you have listened to this podcast, this is a trend.
Yeah.
A lot of professionals in the veterinary community say the same thing. They didn't picture that they would be where they are now. Right. They're in a role that did not exist when they graduated, but it developed and it evolved around their career goals and their financial goals. And so I think that is really important.
Their personal goals too.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like, hey, that differs, right? And so, don't pigeonhole yourself while you're in vet school. Oh, I'm for sure going to be, an equine only person, so I'm going to zone out in, all these other classes because they don't matter, because I know 1,000% I'm going to be driving a truck around Lexington for the next 30 years. And maybe that's true. Maybe it is. I happen to know one fabulous clinician from my class who thought the exact same thing for 4 years. She now runs a cat-only practice in Asheville, North Carolina, and has been doing it for 5+ years and is happy as a clam, right? And that's just how things evolved for her. And so I think it's much more common than not, truthfully. The stereotypical I'm going to be in clinical practice and client facing in the same location in the exact same type of role in the exact same type of practice for 30 straight years is probably not the norm anymore, realistically. And that's okay. It's just evolved.
So hear this. The opportunities are endless, and definitely don't pigeonhole yourself. Be open to those opportunities if they present themselves.
For sure.
Now, as you mentioned, you are here at Virginia, Maryland because you have been invited to participate in our Becoming a Professional program, which is basically, as you mentioned, our professional development program that we have here. It's a course that we take it's 3 courses basically, so we're in our 3rd Becoming a Professional course as 3rd years. And in this course, you've been able to talk to us about developing our cover letter, our resume, how to negotiate a contract. But one thing we also spent a lot of time talking about was mentorship. So I want to shift gears and talk about mentorship now.
Cool.
How important is mentorship in those first 1 to 2 years out of school, and what should students look for in a good mentor or mentorship program?
So for sure, it's critical. I think there's no doubt about that. And I think that's from two aspects. Again, that's your growth as a clinician, right? Because when you graduate, you're going to have those baseline skills for sure. And you have kind of that competency, no doubt, right? It might be buried in there, right? And some of us may feel more or less confident about how competent we are on day one when we walk across the podium and receive our degree than others, and that's okay. But it's in there for sure. But you're definitely not done growing as a clinician. So you need that clinical development, right. And then also that coach to be there really from that aspect of the simple things. They seem simple, but they're really important. Sometimes they're called soft skills, and in my opinion, I think that's a misnomer because it downgrades the value of them, Agreed. Right? So. Are you a good communicator? Can you make connections with people, whether those are your teammates or your clients or whoever you happen to be serving, right? Yeah. Can you be a good teammate? All of those types of things. Can you set some goals for yourself? Great mentors can help you accomplish all of those things. And so whether that's in an internship or a mentorship program or whatever that looks like, there's really great and really less than ideal opportunities in both of those realms, right? So pretending like one is the penultimate and the other one is not going to work is not rational, in my opinion. It's really about the people that are driving it, right? So what is their experience? What's their motivation, and why do they want to do this, right? What matters to them? When I met Dan Markwalder, the reason that he wanted to develop other leaders, because he is passionate about building hospitals. That's what he's passionate about, and each good hospital needs a leader that runs it. And he wanted it run with kind of the culture and the leadership style that were important to him. But he owned 15 practices, and he can't be the flagship person at each of those buildings every single day. That's not realistic. So he needed to build more leaders. That's what his motivation and that's what his why was, right? And so if that works for you, awesome. If that doesn't, also okay. But you need to know that from the beginning. So understanding, with good open-ended questions, what are the expectations? What does the structure look like? Who's going to be that point person? Have they done it before? What's their motivation for why they're doing it now? If they've done it before, can I talk to those individuals about what their experience is like? All of those things, I think, are the ways to effectively prepare for navigating that process to find out whether this is the right setup for you. And that's true regardless of whether it's a mentorship program or an internship program, right? Yeah. Just because an internship is structured doesn't, if it's structured, that's wonderful. And if 50% of your time you're covering and working some ER for someone by yourself and texting your classmates to see if any of them have unblocked a cat before, in my experience, to me, that's not being mentored. That's just working for low pay.
Yeah, absolutely. You're basically answering my next question, which was, if a student is interviewing for jobs, what specific questions should they ask to evaluate the quality of mentorship?
Yeah.
You talked about asking to talk with someone that's been through the program. I think that's pretty important.
Yep.
Asking if the mentors are compensated.
Yep.
I think we talked today about how they can be, how you're both evaluated too.
Yeah.
Any other questions you think they should ask?
Yeah, I think just be conscientious of the why behind things, right? Just because someone hasn't done it before doesn't mean that it's going to go down in a blaze of glory, right? And so just because it's someone, everyone is having their first time mentoring someone, if they're going to be a mentor, they had a first day, right? In the same way that you as a new graduate veterinarian had a first day. I had a first day as a new grad as well, right? And so just because they haven't done it before doesn't mean that's a deal breaker by any stretch of the imagination. But then ask, okay, that's all right. Have you thought through this? What is this going to look like, right? What are your expectations? What do you want from me? These are some of the things that could be valuable from you. And so I think just having those open-ended questions ready to go is the key. And that's where I see a lot of new graduates struggle, Grace, when I interview them.
Yeah. And
they're going through the interview process. A huge percentage of them, when I ask them, what questions do you have for me as a potential employer, they don't have any questions, right? And what fuels me is when that happens, I see myself in them. Moving to Chicago, finishing my internship, and picking the prettiest practice with the most toys, because I didn't really have good questions that would tell me, what does that mentorship program look like? And even bigger picture than that, what is the true culture of this place, and what are the leadership qualities of this leader, right? If I had any of those, I probably would have been able to figure out that the first practice that I worked at struggled with culture and had poor leadership. I just didn't know how to ask reasonable questions associated with that to give me those insights.
Yeah.
And the penultimate, irony of all of that is that those mentors that I mentioned that I've worked for the last 10 years, I interviewed with them when I took the first job at the wrong place too, and they offered me a job. So that job was there, that opportunity was there. I couldn't decipher and distinguish between the two because I hadn't really slowed down to think about what I wanted. I was just too busy trying to not be exhausted from my internship and not be broke, which is not dramatically different than trying to finish through your 4th year and pass your NAVLE and not be exhausted and not be broke. Like, let's be honest, it's the same thing, just a year apart, right? And so it's easy because you get so many of these other things that are like on your priority list. And then for whatever reason, like preparing to find the right job just gets pushed down the ladder. And the truth is, it's way more important than most of those other aspects, which is hard to grasp because you've been in school for forever, right? Yep. And so the next school assignment has to be the most important one. The truth is, by the time you get to your 4th year, you're probably going to graduate, right? Like it'd be pretty tough not to, realistically. Are you going to get the right job by not preparing for the interview? Probably not, honestly, because there's a lot of jobs out there. There's very few that are the right one for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it interesting that a lot of people, when you're interviewing them, don't ask questions. And I feel like there's maybe some underlying, maybe insecurity,
for sure,
not wanting to ask questions, not wanting to put pressure on potential employers, not wanting to come across in the wrong way.
Sure.
I wonder if it's maybe imposter syndrome too. I don't know. Does anything come to mind why that might be?
I think certainly it could, like most things, it's not cut and dry. It's probably a combination of stuff, right? Yeah. So whether it's imposter syndrome, whether it's anxiety for that situation, whether it's a lack of preparation, or whether you just feel like, hey, this isn't my place, right? And I'm just here to answer the questions that he grills me with. Yeah. Pick your combination of those things. The truth is, in reality, your goal should be to evaluate that opportunity just as much as that employer is evaluating you as a potential employee, right? And so regardless of how you get there, it's way better to find out whether this is a good fit in that interview time than it is after you've accepted the wrong position and moved to this new location and maybe moved your family and your life and all of those things, right? And made a big commitment to this next stage of your career. And it doesn't mean that even if you try all those things and do it well, that you're going to get it right every single time, right? Mm-hmm. It's very rare that your first job is your last job, right? Like, that's not a reasonable expectation. But I think it is a reasonable expectation that if you do a good job advocating for yourself and your goals and what matters to you and your family and your finances in the interview process, and ask good open-ended questions about whether that employer, that organization can realistically do a good job of helping you accomplish those things over the first 3 years or so, then there's a really good chance you're going to be able to accomplish those things over those first couple of years. And if you're not proactive about those in that interview process, if it doesn't work out, then from my perspective, some of that is on you as the candidate in terms of the reason why that didn't turn out that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And let's talk more about this. So let's say we have a new grad who really tried to do their due diligence, ask those questions about the mentorship specifically that they were going to get, and say that they start their program, they realize they're not getting the mentorship that they were promised despite their due diligence. Sure. What should they do?
Yeah, so great question. And I think there's still ways to go about that professionally. But again, that's where asking those open-ended questions in the interview to get those specifics can be really, really helpful. Because if you asked me, Dan, what is the time commitment going to look like and what would be our expectations of what the structure is going to be? And I would say, hey, Grace, I think we're going to take 1 hour a week is my goal for the first year. And we're going to sit down and do case review outside of the clinic every single week for a year. That's kind of what I expect us to do. If that's not happening some time interval in, you then have the opportunity to come back to me and say, hey, Dan, when we were in the interview, what I heard in terms of what I heard from you, in terms of what you thought the expectations were that we were going to do this. This hasn't been my experience yet. And I know that there's different reasons why that can happen. Can we circle back to that? I want to make sure I understood those expectations correctly. Number one, give people the opportunity, right? And then say, if that's the case and we're not getting there and we agree about that, what are the things that we can do to prioritize that and make that happen? We were going to do that over lunch. The last 6 weeks, lunch has imploded on us. So can we prioritize blocking ourselves off from 8 to 9 o'clock every single morning? And we're going to start our day at the coffee shop down the street because we have been unsuccessful in securing that lunchtime, and it doesn't seem like that's going to work, right? Come up with a solution, right? And then at that point they can say, you know what, Grace, you're totally right? And I need to take accountability for this as well. And I think the solution that you proposed is totally reasonable. Let's talk with the practice manager and we're going to give this a shot and we're going to commit to it over the next month and let's see how it goes. And then you have that responsibility to continue that follow-up from there. If they just say, no, it's never going to work, it's never going to happen, Grace, go pound sand. At least you can then say, listen, one of the things that really attracted me to this position was what this structure was intended to be and what to look like. I wanted to follow up and see if we could get back to that expectation. It doesn't seem like that's really a possibility right now, and that might impact kind of what my future looks like here, right? And then nobody can have hard feelings about that. And if they do, it's because they're not a professional at the end of the day. So again, you want to manage that in a professional way, but start with what those expectations were from the beginning, which is much easier if they're clear at the jump.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of times students fear that they're going to be causing tension in the workplace. And I want to say emotional intelligence at work here. When you were talking about in that hypothetical situation what you would say, you spoke from I statements from your perspective, not coming in there guns a-blazing, pointing a finger at your employer is going to make it very low tension, low stakes.
Right.
Open the opportunity for the employer to come back with a conversation, say, oh, like these things happened or whatever, and get you guys back on the same ground, on the same footing. So I think
it's
that
always good to kind of take the lens and the perspective of assuming that people have good intent with things, right? And over time, if you identify that that's truly not the case, then obviously that's not going to be a long-term fit anyway. But give people the benefit of the doubt that they're going at things with good intent and it just hasn't come together the way that they were intending. Not because they didn't truly want that to be the case. It's just not coming together for whatever reason. They didn't prioritize it, they forgot, but it wasn't intentional in some bad way. They had something happen at home that just is like, consuming them right now, and that's not their top priority, and whatever, things can happen. And so you never want to take, accusatory frameworks in anything that you're doing, whether it's in your personal relationships or your professional ones or whatever. So, using that lens of, hey, this is kind of what I heard, this is what I'm experiencing. I'd love to get your feedback on what were your expectations associated with this, and can we figure out a way to bridge that is, to your point, way more likely. It's no different than with my fiery associate that I had, right? Like, hey, I needed you to do this. And that's probably not going to work, right? Like, hey, when we sat down a month ago, I thought this is what we talked about, and I thought this was the expectation. Are we on board with that, and do you agree, or do we need to kind of circle back to that conversation?
Yeah, and I don't want to downplay that this is very difficult for students to picture, for new grads to execute. This is really difficult. It's emotionally challenging. It can make people really anxious. But I think that hopefully the purpose of this conversation is to give you guys some tools that you can take into those conversations to make you feel a little bit more empowered. Because it's important that you do this, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you're really unhappy, but you never had the bravery to say something.
Yeah, I think that's really about kind of facilitating that transition from a student, Grace, to a professional, right? And in that process, a huge part of that is starting to be proactive for yourself, right? So in school and as a student, it's different for everybody, but it's more or less, big picture, a linear process, right? I went to school, I got good grades. I went to undergrad, I had to get good grades. I had to do XYZ in order to be a reasonable applicant for vet school. I got into vet school at some point, whether that was direct or I took a little bit of a detour,
Right.
but whatever, at least I knew what the goal was,
Yeah.
more or less, in the boxes that I need to check. And then through school, I'm a professional test taker, let's just call it what it is, for 3 years straight. And I just need to go from one test to the next test to the next test to the next test. And it's all kind of linear and right in front of me. I don't really make a lot of decisions along the way and have to be proactive for myself.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden you graduate and the big wide world of I have a DVM now opens up in front of you, and there are a lot of choices.
Yep.
Which is awesome and also a little bit scary if you're going to like sit back and hope that all the best opportunities just kind of fall in your lap, right? And so we talk a lot in kind of our philosophy of our mentorship program in terms of like making that transition from student to professional includes, you know, starting to be proactive for yourself with communication, with goal setting, all of those aspects of it. You really have to start to think about those things on your own because it's no longer a linear process. There's so many different options and avenues, which is great in terms of the opportunities that having a DVM can provide. And it's why I love it. I'm passionate about it. But it can also be confusing if you haven't thought about it and like think about what matters to you, right? It's like, I got 4,000 options. How do I choose which of these is any good? Like before it was just pass the next test, right? And so like that's a different mindset for sure. And there's no better time to start thinking about it than while you're in school, honestly, because it's gonna come up and happen. So accept it and get ready for it.
Absolutely. And speaking of critical thinking and developing kind of those goals that you have for yourself in your first job, I do want us to talk about new grads choosing their first job after graduation. What factors do you think matter most when choosing a first job that will set you up for long-term success?
Yeah, so I think the way I frame it is I think it's really important to get exposure to what does good look like, right? And I see this with early career veterinarians, with people that are making transitions, those types of things. They've never seen real examples of what good can look like, especially from a leadership and a culture perspective. There's plenty of really good medicine that goes on out there, and there's different levels of that, and that's okay too. Getting exposure to great medicine is phenomenal and is a great thing. If you have phenomenal medicine in a workplace environment and the culture is garbage and the leadership sucks, it doesn't matter how great the medicine is, you're not going to be happy and you're going to change jobs. And then if you don't know still what good looks like, you're likely to pick another job with bad culture and bad leadership. And so again, being prepared to really fundamentally evaluate what does culture look like. Is this a leader that can help me get where I want to go and is willing to put in some time and a commitment to make that happen over the next couple of years? That's the kicker. Now, I've got to be willing to give up something in return, right? Dan and Adam put a ton of time and energy into helping me grow as a clinician and as a leader. I mentioned to you, especially for that first year that I was working for them, I worked every single day with Adam on his same shift, and I wanted to learn orthopedics. And if he was doing ortho on a day that I wasn't off, the option was I could either come in and on my time and scrub in and learn some orthopedics or not. That wasn't an expectation that I would do that in any way, shape, or form. But if I didn't and I missed that opportunity and I didn't develop myself as someone as working towards my goal and I didn't get there, then part of that is on me, basically, right? I told them that I wanted to learn how to be a leader. And so every single week for an entire year, I met with Dan across the street and we had lunch and we worked on professional development, homework, and skills that he had given to me, right? And so they put in a ton of time. I had to put in a ton of time reciprocally as well. Like you have to be willing to put in that work and that grit to get what you want out of it, right? It's like mentorship is not just people handing you stuff in a babysitting situation, right? Like you're going to get a hell of a lot more out of it if you're willing to put in that work to say, you know what? I'm going to be a better clinician tomorrow than I was today, right? Like when I'm interviewing candidates, I think about my first mentee who now runs our hospital, and she was super, super quiet in terms of like kind of her just personality, but she had that motivation and she had that drive. And I'll never forget when she had her first diabetic case that she was working up. It was a real struggle for her. It was really, really hard. We had to basically kind of go through the steps one by one from, diagnostics, interpretation, getting a clinical diagnosis, communication, setting expectations with the client. That's a huge one with diabetes, right? This is a long, big commitment we're talking about here. This is a big deal, right? You can't half in diabetes. You're kind of in or you're out. Those are the options, right? And so going through that with her, it was a big deal, and I was okay to do that. I was happy to do that. My expectation of her was to say, Kristen, this was an area where we found some knowledge gaps for you. You went over diabetes in school at some point along the way, but it got scrambled up there, clearly, which is okay, because you were drinking from the fire hose at some point. It's up there, but it is not in an order that is useful for you right now. This patient is coming back in a week for their next recheck. I need you to fill in these gaps and reorganize this stuff and be better at diabetes next week when this recheck comes in than you were today. Am I still going to help you through it? Of course. Am I going to be there? Yes. Do I expect you to have better questions than you did today? I do. That's my expectation, right? And today, Kristen runs that practice. And I've had that similar conversation with other associates who knew the exact same not enough about diabetes the following week.
Yeah.
Was I still willing to help? Sure. Was I super enthusiastic about it? No. Did that clinician generally end up achieving their same goals or opportunities within veterinary medicine as Kristen did? They didn't. I can't teach that grit. I can't teach that drive. You either have it or you don't, right? And so you got to be able to evaluate those leaders and those mentors and that culture effectively. You have to be willing to put in the work too.
I love that. What are some red flags in a job or a job offer that students should be paying attention to?
I think, especially if we're gonna focus on new grads, right? I think some simple red flags would be, especially if mentorship is a priority, which it generally is, I think, for most new graduate candidates, which is a good thing. That's not bad. I think one red flag would be when you ask someone about what their mentorship program is, if they're struggling to describe it to you.
Yeah.
Right? Because to do it well takes definitely some thought and some commitment. Again, even if you haven't done it before, you still, if you're going to do it the first time, you still should probably think through what that looks like, right? If you haven't thought through what are the things that I could see on this Abdominal Explorer before you go into an Abdominal Explorer, not a great plan, right? And so if you're going to hire a new graduate veterinarian and tell them that you're going to mentor them, but you haven't figured out what that looks like yet, and that new grad asks you a question, can you describe your mentorship program to me? I know this is the first time that you're doing it. What are you expecting to do? And they're really struggling to articulate what that looks like. To me, that's probably a red flag, because that means that maybe we haven't put in the time, thought, and energy to really organizing what this is. Now, that doesn't mean that it still can't be put together. And if you really love that practice and you love that culture, but this is the first time they're doing it, and you really want to be proactive in it, you could say, hey, these would be the things that matter to me. If I put a proposal together, would you commit to this? And can we work through whether this would be reasonable or not? Yeah. You could totally do that.
Yep.
Right? But if they're either not open to that, or they haven't thought through it at all, and also you have no idea what you're looking for as well. You just know you want to be mentored, but you don't know what that means to you, right? And you're hoping that I just put on the great show of mentorship knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And you're just expecting it to fall into your lap. Maybe that's going to happen, but again, are you going to be proactive in could you be proactive in helping someone build it for the first time? That's an opportunity too. But if they're not either willing to do that or they have nothing resembling a plan, that's probably a concern. I think the other ones, again, you've heard me before. I mean, it's taking clinical stuff out of it, right? If you feel like, hey, this type of practice or the style of medicine just doesn't align with me, then that's probably going to be a deal breaker from the jump. That's going to be easier, I think, to evaluate in an interview by just kind of seeing what people are doing, right? But then the other red flags might be, trying to imagine yourself, is this leader capable and willing to help me get where I want to go over the next couple of years? And if they're either not really capable of that or not willing because they've got too many feet in the fire, then those would probably be red flags as well, because it might be a great clinical opportunity or even culture-wise, but at some point you might stagnate with your growth. And if that happens really, really early on because you had these goals and you're not getting any closer to them, then that's probably not going to be a good long-term solve. And by long-term, I even mean like 2 to 3 years, somewhere in that ballpark.
Absolutely. We talked about today in our class that...
Inspiring young minds.
Yes, absolutely. I think we actually talked about it last week, but that doesn't matter.
That's all right.
We mentioned it today in class.
Great.
That the unemployment rate in veterinary medicine is basically 0%.
Close enough, yeah.
So I want to
DVM and a pulse, you're good to go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This next question is very dear to me, and I think it's an important question to ask. So because the unemployment rate's so low, a lot of students are going to expect and will receive multiple offers.
Yes.
So how should they go about comparing them in a meaningful way?
Yeah, so great question. So if we're in a scenario where you're evaluating different offers, I would say that there's a reasonable likelihood when you look at the meat and potatoes of what's in those different offers. Let's say you went to 3 job interviews and you've got 3 job offers, like totally reasonable scenario that you could be in like 6 months from now, Grace, right? There's a reasonable chance in my experience that most of the meat and potatoes inside those things is going to be pretty similar, right? Like your compensation might be plus or minus $10,000, right? And I know that's a big deal because like you're super broke, right? I get it. In the grand scheme of like variability, it's kind of minimal, to be honest with you, right? Many of the benefits might be really, really similar. The amount of PTO, the amount of your CE budget, those types of things. Like they could vary for sure, but in the grand scheme of things, that variability is probably going to be relatively low. If you get an outlier, it's going to be pretty easy to see that from the jump. And you could even go back to that person if you were really interested in that opportunity and say, hey, listen, can you help me understand a little bit more about what's going on here? Because the average compensation right now, even for last year's graduating class, was X, right? And in this area, it seems like it's this. And I do have multiple other offers in this area, and this just seems like it's discordant with that. Can you help me understand kind of why that is, right? They might not know that it's discordant with someone else. They might have an aha moment themselves, right? Which is okay too. So in terms of considering them in a meaningful way, again, the meat and potatoes of the contract is likely going to be relatively similar for most of them. So I think that really the key differentiators are what is the opportunity that offer represents in terms of what matters to me, right? And so let's say, just as a hypothetical, that you've got a high debt burden, Grace, right? There's, again, in that AVMA paper that's published every single year, it will tell you the percentage of graduates with different levels of debt, all the way from $0 to I think they put it at 400 plus now is like the big bucket. And both of those extreme buckets are growing every single year. So there's a bucket, which is wonderful for the people in the 0 bucket. God bless them. That's fantastic. There's also a growing percentage of folks in the $400,000 plus bucket. I'm going to say it's 10 plus percent. I might be fudging it, but that's close enough, right? So let's say that finances are critically important to you, Grace, because you have a high debt burden. You're one of those unfortunate students with a high debt burden, right? So if most of the meat and potatoes in the contract is pretty similar, what might be really valuable to you is your growth potential within that practice or within that organization, right? So if it's going to have your base salary and your compensation associated with it, which is going to be pretty comparable with your other offers and probably what your other classmates are getting, what really matters is what is my earning potential in this practice in the next 1 to 2 years. So be able to ask those questions about that in the interview process and say, sure, this offer does say $130,000 as a base, and this one says $132,000. Whatever. Can I negotiate to make that the same if I wanted to? Sure. In the grand scheme of things, is that a massive difference? No. But if the highest earners in hospital A are taking home $140,000 a year, and in hospital B they're taking home anywhere between $175,000 and $225,000 a year, and a high debt burden is a big deal for you, then that second offer may have way more value to you than the first one, But the only way to know that is knowing first what matters to you and prioritizing your own goals, so you can evaluate the opportunity based on those things. And we used a financial example, but that also could include your professional goals or even your personal goals. I think we talked about in class, like if that proximity to family is the end all, be all of everything to you, which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying that it is. If that's a top priority for you, right, outside of work, and these two offers are very, very similar in terms of the meat and potatoes, in terms of what's in there. But this one allows it to be feasible to make it to Sunday dinner, 4 weeks out of the month because of the proximity, versus the other one is all the way on the other side of Virginia. And realistically, that's not happening. Then maybe there's greater value in this other one. So I think thinking about those goals and what does that kind of opportunity look like for growth and for happiness is really how you kind of compare those overall.
Listeners, are you noticing a theme? SMART goals keep coming up.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, and it's good, not only in this conversation, but in other conversations. So I think it is really important for us to get clear. In school, it's hard for us to set aside time to think about these things, but we need to set aside time to sit down and really think about what our goals are, where do we envision ourselves, and come up with a list of those things.
What's going to make you happy?
Yeah, absolutely.
What fills your happiness buckets?
Absolutely. Well, I want to start to wrap us up, so I just have a few more questions for you.
Great.
What does a successful veterinary career look like to you now compared to when you first graduated?
Tough question. So it's, again, like most things, it's evolved quite a bit. So I think how I would think about a successful veterinary career now really comes down to, I think, a couple of things, not only for myself, but I think for most of our colleagues as well. So the first is that you have the opportunity to continue to grow professionally, right? In whatever avenue that looks like. And again, maybe you don't know or anticipate what that is or what that vision of that looks like now, right? Maybe you have your plan in place and it evolves over time, right? Maybe you thought that you were going to be doing something and instead you found a different clinical passion somewhere. And that powerhouse associate that I was mentioning to you, she loves surgery, orthopedics, and chemotherapy, and going home to her kids.
Yeah.
And she works 3 days a week, and she spends 2.5 of those days doing surgery, orthopedics, and chemotherapy. And she is happy as a clam.
That's so cool.
Happy as a clam. Awesome. Fantastic. That's great. Beautiful, right?
Yeah.
Or you want to go into leadership, or you want to go into ownership or entrepreneurship, or you want to go into research or public health or whatever it is, right? Like, what is that next professional growth opportunity? So continuing to grow, I think, is really, really important and fulfilling for most people that end up in the veterinary profession, so that you don't feel like you're getting stagnant. And then I'll be honest, I think the other big aspects of it are, do you have financial freedom for yourself, which I totally believe is absolutely achievable in veterinary medicine. I refuse to stand by and listen to people that are the Debbie Downers that say that that's not possible.
Yeah.
Are there some barriers for some individuals? Yes. Can you overcome them in veterinary medicine? Also, yes. I'm passionate about that as well. I think that individuals with DVMs have distinguished themselves. They've worked really, really hard to earn a degree that's highly valuable and highly pliable. And you should be able to pay off your debt. You should be able to own a house.
Yeah.
You should be able to start a family. You should be able to go on vacation in a reasonable sort of way where you don't have to count every single penny every time that you're trying to do it. Can you go on vacation every single week? No. Right? Are you gonna are you gonna be living on Wall Street this week? No. But the idea that you have to be a pauper, I think, is laughable. I really do. I don't believe that. I really just don't. And I think that ignoring that aspect of it is also kind of unjust, because everyone goes into veterinary medicine for the right reasons, but the idea that you have to be cripplingly broke associated with that, to me, is not fair and is not a reasonable expectation. And it can also impact your life, right? Like everyone talks about work-life balance, work-life integration. I don't know what the proper definition of that is, but I do know that professional satisfaction, financial, your financial situation and freedom and your family life, they all influence each other. I do know that. And I know that if you're struggling in one of those, it's very difficult for them not to influence each other as well. And so, to me, a successful veterinary career is you're growing professionally. You have financial freedom so that you can be the best version of yourself for the people that matter to you, basically. And I wasn't in that spot when I didn't have goals and I didn't have mentors, and developing those things really changed all of that for me, and it influenced those other aspects of my life, and that's kind of what drives me to try to help others in those areas too.
I love that. Just one last question for you. If you could give one piece of advice to any veterinary student, what would it be?
One piece of advice to any veterinary student. I don't want to sound too much like a broken record. Spend some time thinking about what matters to you and be proactive to build a network to find people that are willing to help you get there. Yeah, because you can accomplish a lot on your own. You can also run into some barriers and some walls, and you really don't know the additional opportunities that are out there in veterinary medicine until you have other people kind of rowing along with you that open additional doors that you didn't even know existed. So think about what you want and what might make you happy, and be proactive to go out there and get it. Don't be passive.
And I think your story is such a perfect example of how you've had people help you along the way. And you've really that's really fueled the success of your career.
Sure.
So, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join me on this podcast. I feel like it was super informative, and I really enjoyed learning more about you and your story. So thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me. It was super fun.
And with that, my name is Grace Gaynor, and I just interviewed Dr. Phillips, and we are
Scrubbing Out.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Scrubbed In, the DVM Journey. Thanks for tuning in and being a part of our community of future vets and animal lovers. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. It helps others find the show and join the conversation. And if you have any questions or topics you'd love to hear about, feel free to leave us a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep scrubbing in, and remember, the journey to becoming a DVM is one step at a time.